Okay, so at number 10, I've got Snake from the Metal Gear Solid series. Um, Reason I went with Snake is I think overall he's a really cool character. The Metal Gear Solid series in general is really just a dope game, a dope series of games, I should say. And his longevity throughout his actual series and his features in other games is why I would definitely have him on my list.
So my number 10 is Goku. Um, I know he's not necessarily a protagonist in a video game per se, but I think he does deserve some recognition because he's just a great overall protagonist in pop culture in general. And I think he deserves recognition because he has been in great games. So I gave number 10 to Goku.
At number 9, I've got CJ from the Grand Theft Auto San Andreas game. Overall, I think Grand Theft Auto San Andreas was the best entry in the series. It could obviously use an update, and they did redefine that game. Um, but overall, man, he's just an iconic and very memorable character. And he might be the most popular Grand Theft Auto character as well. That's obviously subjective, but either way, he makes number 9 on my list.
So my number 9 is Marcus Phoenix. Funny thing about him is he will be being played by Dave Bautista in a Netflix adaptation of Gears of War. But I think he has a great character, and the story of Gears of War was really touching for me personally. So I gave number 9 to Marcus Phoenix.
At number 8, we got the iconic Mario. Mario was a huge part of my childhood, starting with his games for the Super Nintendo, Nintendo 64, things like that. Obviously, he has some longevity and they put out a multitude of games featuring his name, bearing his name and featuring his character like Super Smash Brothers, everything else. You know, you got Mario Kart, etc. So if so I definitely would have to add Mario to my list. Coming in at number 8.
Number 8 is Jin Kazama. I personally enjoyed his character the most, not out of the top 10, but just the most in Tekken in general and most fighting games in general. There is going to be another fighting character on this list, but I think that his story is the most unique in terms of fighting games. And I think Tekken did a really good job laying out the progression of their story from Heihachi to Kazuya to Jin. But I think Jin's story is the most unique, and his is probably the best told in Tekken.
At number 7, I've got Ryu from Street Fighter. Ryu has always pretty much been my favorite Street Fighter character. He's got a really cool look about him. He's got some of the best moves and some of the most memorable moves in the entire series. And I would say he's one of the staple characters as well. He's one of the main characters, if I'm not mistaken as well. He's somebody that usually comes up when the name Street Fighter comes up in general. So had to bring in Ryu at number 7.
So at number 7, I got Louis Kang. He's probably my favorite fighting character of all time, fighting game character of all time. I just really like his style. It seems to be based off of Bruce Lee a little bit, and I'm a huge Bruce Lee fan, so that really feeds into my my admiration for his style of character and the way the Mortal Kombat like put him together.
At number 6, had to go with my man Sub Zero. Now this one is interesting because in some variations of the games and the movies, he's kind of looked at as a heel or an antagonist, but in my opinion, he's definitely a protagonist in most versions of games and things like that that I've seen him in. And how can you not love the way he stands out physically? You know, his costumes are always top notch and look incredible. And also his moves, man. He's got some of the best moves in the game. I love the whole ice element, things like that. So, had to have Sub Zero at number 6.
So at number 6, I have Dante from Devil May Cry, and I really love the design of this character. He's a very cool and slick character. Like everything, he's like, I know this is gonna sound cheesy, but he's too cool for school, and that's something that I really like about the character. And the game, he gives a great vibe to the video game Devil May Cry. He's just his like, you can tell the it's almost like the game was built around him, so that makes him a really great character.
At number 5, we've got Sonic the Hedgehog. This is a character that pretty much stems all the way from my childhood. He's always been a cool character to me. He's had a ton of games and a ton of games that have been like very enjoyable and things like that. A lot of the Sonic world in general is a very colorful and creative place. So I would have to throw Sonic in there as well. Just another one of those iconic characters, just like Mario, but to me, Sonic has a little more sentimental value, so he definitely makes it a little higher on the list.
So my number 5 is Mario, and the reason he's number 5, I think, is off the strength of just his I think he's number 5 just off of the strength of his contribution to the video gaming world. Everybody knows who Mario is. Everybody kind of identifies with this workhorse workman guy just trying to do the extraordinary and saving their princess or prince or whatever. So I definitely give Mario the number 5 spot in my list.
At number 4, we've got Clementine from the Walking Dead series. Clementine is a character for me who's recently grown on me. I've played almost all of the actual games that she's in, and she is a character that was very masterfully developed over the entirety of the series. You really grow attached to her. She's very relatable, and you grow a lot of sentimental feelings towards Clementine for sure. She kind of feels like a little sister kind of character. So she is definitely a character that's a little newer to me, but that I've grown to really like over time.
So number 4 is Arthur Morgan. And I believe that Arthur Morgan is one of those characters that when you play Red Dead Redemption 2 and you play as Arthur Morgan, you root for him at every single turn. He's one of those guys that you just know that he's always trying to do the right thing, even though he's not necessarily a protagonist in the way that he's a good guy, but you know that he's always trying to do the right thing. So that's why he's at my number four.
At number three, I have Arthur Morgan from the Red Dead Redemption series. Red Dead Redemption 2 is probably my favorite game of all time. It is just literally a masterpiece, one of the best games I've ever played. Arthur Morgan, in particular, is a great character. You really get to see him redeem himself over the course of the story and things like that. He's funny at times, he's relatable, and he's just an overall really cool guy. So, at number three, I got Arthur Morgan.
Number three is a personal favorite, and that is Ike from Fire Emblem. To me, he was one of those guys who really stood out in that series in particular. I mean, there were characters like Crom, characters like Marth and Roy and Elliewood, but I feel like Ike was the most. He stood out the most to me, and since I love that series so much, I had to put someone in here, and I think he was the best figure personally for me to put in.
At number two, I've got Batman for sure. I mean, Batman is somebody I would imagine is very high on almost anyone's protagonist list. Um, Definitely a personal hero of mine. Just the character in general, what the character stands for, an icon, has been in so many movies and games, and is just one of the coolest characters ever created, in my opinion. So I think number two with Batman is just a no-brainer, just a classic character.
Okay, so at number two, we have Chris Redfield. So I've always enjoyed the survival horror aspect of Resident Evil, and watching those games growing up and playing those games as I got older, it's always been very exciting and enthralling to follow the story of Chris Redfield. Um, I feel like similar to Arthur Morgan, he's always trying to do the right thing, but where he differs from Arthur is he's actually always on the good side of everything. So he's always trying to fight for the betterment of the world. And that's what really makes him a great protagonist.
And at number one, I had to go with my man Chris Redfield. Probably the most iconic Resident Evil character from my favorite series of games in general, which is the Resident Evil series. Chris is somebody who's been there since the beginning, and you really get to see develop over time throughout the games. He's been in one. He pretty much started the series off in one, and I believe he makes an appearance in eight as well. So he's been there through and through. Even in the games that he's not physically in, he has some sort of connection to, whether it's through other characters or through plot lines. So I would have to go with my man Chris Redfield at number one.
And finally, the number one, my top protagonist in any game that I've ever played, my top protagonist in video games, Joel from The Last of Us. And I will say that similar to Arthur Morgan, he blurs the lines between being what a good guy is supposed to be. He's not a good guy. He's not a person who is going to always do the right thing. Sometimes he's selfish, but I think you can't overlook his sense of compassion in terms of the game that he was in, his sense of compassion for Ellie. I know that he lost his daughter, so that's where it all kind of spurred from. But he had a sense of compassion for this girl, and he was able to travel all the way across the country for this girl. And I don't want to give away any spoilers about how everything goes, but I believe that he was the top protagonist for me personally in video games.